So the 20th century is probably one of the most violent centuries in all of world history. Many of its leaders were good, many bad, some in between. I guess it's the same with all people. So let's see which ones were good, which ones were bad, and which ones are just meh. Yikes. Okay, so this is Adolf Hitler. He was leader of Nazi Germany from his appointment as chancellor in 1933 until his possible suicide in 1945. I'm kidding. He died then. Hitler was responsible for starting World War II and for killing more than 11 million people during what we now call the Holocaust. So, and, just kind of a downright evil, terrible, terrible man. Benito Mussolini, he served as Italy's 40th prime minister from 1922 until 1943. He is considered a central figure in the creation of fascism and was both an influence on and a close ally of Adolf Hitler during World War II. In 1943, Mussolini was replaced as prime minister and served as the head of the Italian Socialist Republic until his execution by Italian partisans in 1945. Basically, he had been sent to prison. Nazis sent a bunch of soldiers to break him out. World War II slowly begins to end. Those soldiers leave. Mussolini's just driving along the countryside with his mistress. He gets pulled over, stopped, and then he gets to hang in the town square of the city of Milan, and that's how he dies. And yes, his mistress dies with him. I think they were both shot first, then hung. Either way, dead. Che Guevara. He was an Argentine medical doctor who took part with Fidel Castro and other Cuban rebels in the successful attempt to overthrow the Cuban government. After the revolutionary movement took power in 1959, Guevara held important posts in the government. In 1965, he resigned his position and disappeared from public view. Guevara later reappeared in Bolivia in 1967 at the head of a revolutionary movement, but he was captured and killed by the members of the Bolivian army. It is thought that perhaps the CIA had something to do with it. They were certainly there, we know that. To what extent they were involved in his murder remains to be seen. Eva Perón, she was the wife of Argentine President Juan Perón and First Lady of Argentina from 1946 until her death in 1952. As First Lady, she was fondly called Evita by many and played a major role in her husband's administration. She is widely remembered for her efforts to help the poor and her role in getting women the right to vote. Although she was adored by the masses, some intensely disliked her, believing she was very ambitious. Her life was cut short when she died of cancer at the age of 33. Fidel Castro. In 1959, Fidel Castro took control of Cuba by force and remained its leader for nearly 5 decades. Nearly every president until about 2000 tried to kill him, and none succeed. As the leader of the only communist country in the Western Hemisphere, Castro has been the focus of international controversy, and as I've said many times, historians debate to what extent, was he a good or a bad leader. Golda Meir. She was Prime Minister of Israel during a time of intense warfare. Her deep commitment to the cause of Zionism determined the course of her life. She moved from Russia to Wisconsin when she was 8. Then at 23, she immigrated to what was then called Palestine with her husband. Once there, Golda Meir played key roles in advocating for a Jewish state, including raising money for the cause. When Israel declared its independence in 1948, Golda Meir was one of the 25 signers of this historic document. After serving as Israel's ambassador to the Soviet Union, Minister of Labor, and Foreign Minister, Golda Meir became Israel's 4th Prime Minister in 1969. Indira Nehru Gandhi was the first female Prime Minister of India, serving 3 consecutive terms from 1966 to 1977 and a 4th term from 1980 to 1984. She was the daughter of the former Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India after independence was achieved. Although she was popular and beloved leader, Indira Gandhi shocked many with her dictatorial tactics during her third term in office. She was assassinated in 1984 by a Sikh extremist. Leon Trotsky was a communist theorist, prolific writer, and leader in the 1917 Russian Revolution. He was also the People's Commissar for Foreign Affairs under Lenin, and then head of the Red Army as the People's Commissar of Army and Navy Affairs. Exiled from the Soviet Union after losing a power struggle with Stalin over who was to become Lenin's successor, Trotsky was eventually brutally assassinated in 1940 when they actually killed him with an ice pick to the head. Margaret Thatcher was the first female Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. She served 3 consecutive terms from 1979 to 1990. Known for her steely resolve and determination, Thatcher is also remembered for her conservative social and economic policies. The daughter of a grocer, she rose from the ranks of the poor into the very high position in the nation. Thatcher, along with U.S. President Ronald Reagan and Soviet General Secretary Gorbachev, is credited with helping to bring about the end of the Cold War. Mikhail Gorbachev, he was the last General Secretary of the Soviet Union. He brought about massive economic, social, and political changes and helped bring an end to both the Soviet Union and the Cold War. Incidentally, it was thought that he really liked American fast food, so one of the things is that they often say is just kind of a joke is that he ended the Cold War so he could have Burger King. Nelson Mandela. He was elected the first Black president of South Africa in 1994, following the first multiracial election in South Africa's history. Mandela was imprisoned from 1962 to 1990 for his role in fighting apartheid policies established by the ruling white minority. Revered by his people as a national symbol of the struggle for equality, Mandela is considered one of the 20th century's most influential political figures. He and South African Prime Minister F.W. de Klerk were jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1993 for their role in dismantling the apartheid system. This is King George V of England. His reign saw the rise of socialism, communism, fascism, Irish republicanism, and the Indian independence movement, all of which radically changed the political landscape. The Parliament Act of 1911 established the supremacy of the elected British House of Commons over the unelected House of Lords. As a result of the First World War, the empires of his first cousins, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia and Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, fell, while the British Empire expanded to its greatest effective extent. Tsar Nicholas II of Russia was the last Tsar of Russia. He ascended to the throne following the death of his father in 1894. Woefully unprepared for such a role, Nicholas II has been characterized as naive and an incompetent leader. At a time of enormous social and political change in his country, Nicholas held fast to outdated autocratic policies and opposed reform of any kind. His inept handling of military matters and insensitivity to the needs of his people helped fuel the 1917 Russian Revolution. Kaiser Wilhelm II was the last German emperor and king of Prussia, ruling from 1888 to 1918. Upon being crowned, he immediately dismissed the famous Chancellor Otto von Bismarck so that he can launch Germany on a new course in foreign affairs that really culminated in his support of Austria and Hungary in the crisis that led up to the First World War. He was bombastic and impetuous. He sometimes made public, tactless pronouncements over sensitive topics. He was an ineffective war leader, and as a result, he lost the support of the army. He's going to abdicate in November 1918 and flee to the Netherlands. Emperor Franz Joseph I. He was Emperor of Austria and King of Hungary and a Habsburg. He's going to be the longest reigning emperor in Austrian history, reigned from 1848 to 1916. He was also known as the Emperor of Sorrows because his wife was assassinated, his son committed suicide. I mean, this was a really sad man by the end of 1916. So by the time he dies, they're pretty much losing the war, and from then on, we're going to see a whole different situation in the 20th century in Austria. Pancho Villa was a Mexican revolutionary leader who advocated for the poor and wanted agrarian reform. Though he was sometimes termed a killer, and he could be a bandit, maybe possibly, he was also a revolutionary leader, and many remember him as a folk hero. Pancho Villa was also responsible for a raid on Columbus, New Mexico in 1916, which was the first attack on U.S. soil since 1812. Pol Pot. As head of the Khmer Rouge, Pol Pot oversaw an unprecedented and extremely brutal attempt to remove Cambodia from the modern world and establish an agrarian utopia. While attempting to create this utopia, Pol Pot created the Cambodian genocide, which lasted from 1975 to 1979 and caused the deaths of at least 1.5 million Cambodians out of a population of approximately 8 million. Incidentally, he died peacefully in his bed. President Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan became the oldest president elected when he took office as the 40th president of the United States. He was an actor turned politician, and he served 2 terms as president from 1981 to 1989. As a result, he will oversee the heightening of tensions in what historians term as the Second Cold War. Saddam Hussein. He was the ruthless dictator of Iraq from 1979 until 2003. In his early life as leader of Iraq, he was revered because he was a hero from the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s. Later on, he just starts to he kind of wants to take over all the oil in the Middle East from Western civilization. And they're like, no, that's our job. And so you get the Gulf War. And then by 2003, he's found in a bunker and dies shortly afterwards. Winston Churchill was a legendary orator, a prolific writer, an earnest artist, and a long-term British statesman. Yet Churchill, who twice served as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, is best remembered as the tenacious and forthright war leader that led his country against the seemingly undefeatable Nazis during World War II. Eleanor Roosevelt was one of the most respected and beloved women of the 20th century. She overcame a sad childhood and severe self-consciousness to become a passionate advocate for the rights of women, racial and ethnic minorities, and the poor. When her husband became the President of the United States, Eleanor Roosevelt transformed the role of First Lady by taking an active role in the work of her husband, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. After Franklin's death, Eleanor Roosevelt was appointed a delegate to the newly formed United Nations, where she helped create the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is Mohandas Gandhi. Gandhi is another one of those leaders that we're re-looking at with new eyes now. Gandhi is considered the father of Indian independence movement. Gandhi spent 20 years in South Africa working to fight discrimination. It was there that he created his concept of non-violent way of protesting against injustices. While in India, Gandhi's obvious virtue, simplistic lifestyle, and minimal dress endeared him to the people. He spent his remaining years working diligently to both remove British rule from India as well as to better the lives of India's poorest classes. Mother Teresa founded the Missionaries of Charity, a Catholic order of nuns dedicated to helping the poor. Begun in Calcutta, India, the Missionaries of Charity grew to help the poor, the dying, orphans, lepers, and AIDS sufferers in over 100 countries. Mother Teresa's selfless effort to help those in need has caused many to regard her as a model of humanitarianism. Dwight D. Eisenhower, an American Army general who served as the 34th President of the United States from 1953 to 1961. During World War II, he became a five-star general in the Army and served as Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force in Europe. He was responsible for planning and supervising the invasion of North Africa in Operation Torch and the successful invasion of Normandy from the Western Front. In 1952, Eisenhower entered the presidential race as a Republican to block the isolationist foreign policies of Senator Robert A. Taft. Taft opposed NATO and wanted no foreign entanglements. Eisenhower won that election and the 1956 election, and as a result, the United States will go on to be, create NATO, United Nations, be highly involved in all of those. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he led the United States during both the Great Depression and World War II. He was paralyzed from the waist down after suffering a bout of polio, but Roosevelt overcame his disability and was elected President of the United States an unprecedented 4 times. Mao Zedong, commonly referred to as Chairman Mao, was a Chinese communist revolutionary, guerrilla warfare strategist, Marxist political philosopher, and leader of the Chinese Revolution. He was the architect and founding father of the People's Republic of China from its establishment in 1949 and held control over that nation until his death in 1976. His theoretical contribution to Marxist-Leninism is significant, along with his military strategies and brand of policies. All are collectively known as Maoism. Charles de Gaulle was a French army officer and statesman who led Free French forces against Nazi Germany in World War II. He also is going to chair the provincial government in order to reestablish democracy in France after the war. In 1958, he rewrote the Constitution of France and founded the Fifth Republic after approval by a vote by the people. He was elected President of France later that year, a position to which he held until his resignation in 1969. He was the dominant figure in France during the early part of the Cold War. His memory continues to influence French politics today. Vladimir Lenin. He was a Russian Marxist revolutionary and communist politician who led the October Revolution of 1917. As leader of the Bolsheviks, he headed the Soviet state during its initial years from 1917 to 1924 as it fought to establish control of Russia in the Russian Civil War, and then he worked to create a socialist economic system. Joseph Stalin. He is one of the most powerful and murderous dictators in history. He was the supreme ruler of the Soviet Union for a quarter of a century, from 1924 to 1953. His regime caused the death and suffering of tens of millions of people, but he also oversaw the war machine that played a key role in the defeat of Nazism. Mustafa Kemal, otherwise known as Ataturk, was an Ottoman and Turkish army officer, revolutionary statesman, writer, and the first president of Turkey. He is credited with being the founder of the Republic of Turkey. Ataturk was a military officer during World War I. Following the defeat of the Ottoman Empire in World War I, he led the Turkish national movement in the Turkish War of Independence. King Leopold II was the king of the Belgians, and he is mainly remembered for the brutal exploitation of the Congo Free State. Leopold actually created the Congo Free State so as to extract rubber and ivory in the Congo region of Central Africa. He used forced labor, which resulted in the deaths of more than 3 million Congolese. John Fitzgerald Kennedy. He is our 35th President of the United States, serving from 1961 until 1963. He's best remembered for what happened on November 22nd, 1963, when he was hardly past his first 1,000 days in office. JFK was killed by an assassin's bullets as his motorcade wound through Dallas, Texas. Kennedy was the youngest man elected president, and he was the youngest to die. Joseph Tito, he was the dictator of Yugoslavia, and one of the founders of the Third World Movement. As a result, he was greatly regarded all over the developing world. Yugoslavia under Tito was the only European communist country which did not become a Soviet satellite state. Despite this, it was a country where life standards were high, and lots of people who lived in this period would even argue that they liked it better under Tito's leadership. Ho Chi Minh. He was a Vietnamese communist revolutionary leader and a key figure in the foundation of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam in 1945, as well as the People's Army of Vietnam and the Viet Cong during the Vietnam War. He led the Viet Minh independence movement from 1941 onward, establishing the communist-ruled Democratic Republic of Vietnam in 1945 and defeating the French in 1954. He officially stepped down from power in 1965 due to health problems, but remained a highly visible figurehead and inspiration for those Vietnamese fighting for his cause, a united communist Vietnam, until his death. After the war, Saigon, the former capital of the Republic of Vietnam, was renamed Ho Chi Minh City. Deng Xiaoping was a Chinese revolutionary and statesman. He was the paramount leader of the People's Republic of China from 1978 until his retirement in 1989. After Chairman Mao's death, Deng led his country through far-reaching market economy reforms. While Deng never held office as the head of state, head of government, or general secretary, that is, the leader of the Communist Party, he nonetheless was responsible for economic reforms and the opening to the global economy. Sun Yat-sen. He was a Chinese physician, writer, philosopher, revolutionary, and the first president and founding father of the Republic of China, which will be China from 1912 to 1948. As the foremost pioneer of the Republic of China, Sun is referred to as the father of the nation in Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau, and the forerunner of the Democratic Revolution in the People's Republic of China. Sun played an instrumental role in the overthrow of the Qing dynasty. He was appointed to serve as provincial president of the Republic of China when it was founded in 1912. He later co-founded the Nationalist Party of China, serving as its first leader. Sun was a uniting figure in post-imperial China, and he remains unique among 20th century Chinese politicians for being widely revered amongst the people from both sides of the Taiwan Strait. Emperor Hirohito of Japan. He was the 124th Emperor of Japan according to the traditional order of succession. He reigned from December 25, 1926 until his death on January 7, 1989. Although better known outside Japan by his personal name, Hirohito, in Japan he is now referred to primarily by the name Emperor Showa. The word Showa is the name of the era that corresponded with the emperor's reign and was made the emperor's own name upon his death. The name Hirohito means abundant benevolence. Zhou Enlil was the first premier of the People's Republic of China, serving from October 1949 until his death in January 1976. Zhou served under Chairman Mao Zedong and was instrumental in the Communist Party's rise to power and later in consolidating its control, forming foreign policy, and developing the Chinese economy. A skilled and able diplomat, Zhou advocated peaceful coexistence with the West after the stalemated Korean War. Ayatollah Khomeini. He was an Iranian Shia Muslim religious leader, philosopher, revolutionary, and politician. He was the founder of the Islamic Republic of Iran and the leader of the 1979 Iranian Revolution that saw the overthrow of the Pahlavi monarchy. Following the revolution, Khomeini became the country's supreme leader and religious authority of the nation, which he held until his death in 1989. President Richard Nixon. He was the 37th President of the United States, serving from 1969 until 1974. After 5 years in the White House, this saw the conclusion to the U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War, détente with the Soviet Union and China, and the establishment of the Environmental Protection Agency. He became the only president to resign from the office. Erich Honecker. He was an East German politician who was also the General Secretary of the Socialist Unity Party of Germany. As party leader, he worked closely with Moscow. He controlled the government of East Germany from 1971 until he was forced out in the weeks preceding the fall of the Berlin Wall in October 1989. Sirimavo Bandaranaike. She was born into an aristocratic family in Sri Lanka. Bandaranaike was educated in English-speaking Catholic schools, but she remained a Buddhist and spoke the native language Sinhala as well. Her husband became prime minister, and she served as a trusted informal advisor. As First Lady, her social work focused on improving the lives of women and girls in the rural areas of Sri Lanka. Following her husband's assassination in 1959, she entered politics. As a result, she becomes the first female prime minister in all of world history. Hugo Chavez. He was a Venezuelan politician who was president of Venezuela from 1999 until his death in 2013. He was also leader of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela. Internationally, Chavez aligned himself with the Marxist-Leninist governments of Fidel and then Raul Castro in Cuba, as well as the socialist governments of Evo Morales in Bolivia, Rafael Correa in Ecuador, and Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua. His presidency was seen as a part of the socialist pink tide that swept Latin America. Chavez described his policies as anti-imperialist, being a prominent adversary of the United States foreign policy as well as a vocal critic of U.S.-supported neoliberalism and laissez-faire capitalism. Henry Kissinger. He was an American politician, diplomat, and geopolitical consultant who served under the presidential administrations of Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford. A Jewish refugee who fled Nazi Germany with his family in 1938, he became National Security Advisor in 1969 and U.S. Secretary of State in 1973. For his actions negotiating a ceasefire in Vietnam, Kissinger received the 1973 Nobel Peace Prize under controversial circumstances, with 2 members of the committee resigning in protest. Madeleine Albright. She was an American politician and diplomat who served as the first female United States Secretary of State in U.S. history. She served from 1997 to 2001 under President Bill Clinton. President Jimmy Carter is an American politician, philanthropist, and former farmer who served as the 39th President of the United States from 1977 to 1981. Since leaving the presidency, Carter has remained engaged in political and social protests as a private citizen. In 2002, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his work in co-founding the Carter Center. Gamal Nasser. He was an Egyptian politician who served as the president of Egypt from 1954 until his death in 1970. Nasser led the 1952 overthrow of the monarchy. He was formally elected president in June 1956. Nasser's popularity in Egypt and the Arab world skyrocketed after his nationalization of the Suez Canal and his political victory of the during the Suez crisis that followed. Calls for pan-Arab unity under his influence increased, culminating with the formation of the United Arab Republic with Syria from 1958 to 1961. In 1962, Nasser began a series of major socialist measures and modernization reforms in Egypt. Despite setbacks to his pan-Arab cause, by 1963, Nasser's supporters had gained power in several Arab countries, but this also embroiled him further into the much larger Arab Cold War. Kim Jong-il. He was a North Korean politician who served as the second supreme leader of North Korea from 1994 to 2011. The most common title given to Kim was Dear Leader, to distinguish him from his father, Kim Il-sung, who was known as the Great Leader. After his death, Kim was designated the Eternal General Secretary of the WKP, in keeping with the tradition of establishing eternal posts for the dead members of the Kim dynasty. President George H.W. Bush. He was an American politician, diplomat, and businessman who served as the 41st President of the United States. Before becoming president, Bush served as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, as U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, as Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, and as the 43rd Vice President under Ronald Reagan. In the 1988 presidential election, Bush became the first incumbent vice president to be elected president since Martin Van Buren in 1836. In conclusion, a lot of these people that I shared with you are open to, interpretation, to new research, to looking at them again. For instance, we look at Stalin. He was beloved by historians in the 1950s, and today we call him a mass murderer. So, things change over time, and our ideas about people change over time. For instance, Gandhi wasn't nice to his wife, and so now we're revisiting Gandhi, and there's a lot of instances. Golda Meir, of course, was a Zionist, and today we're, embroiled in the issue of pro-Palestine, pro-Zionism. So, all of these people can have a fresh new look and to kind of determine it, but none of them can be argued, or not, you can't argue that they weren't important to the 20th century.